The new Connecticut Motor Vehicle Crash Report form will be required for all motor vehicle crashes occurring on or after January 1st, 2015. This new form will replace the PR-1 last revised in 1994. The new PR-1 no longer relies on overlays or code sheets, and all acceptable entries for each data field are located in the data element box. The new PR-1 will make data entry and supervisory review more efficient while updating Connecticut's crash report form to national guidelines. The new form is comprised of 3 main sections and a series of appendices, which apply only to special crashes. These 3 data items are divided into crash, vehicle, and person. The first sheet is the crash summary. The front page of this section documents the when, where, crash factors, and conditions. The back of this section allows the officer to generate a diagram of the crash, write a narrative, and document the officer writing and approving the report. The second sheet is designed to collect information on each vehicle involved in the crash. A front and back should be completed for each vehicle. Information such as VIN number, registration number, vehicle damage, and sequence of events will be reported in this section. The third sheet is for persons involved in the crash. One driver sheet should be completed for each driver. The back of the driver's page should be used to document up to 4 passengers in that driver's vehicle. If more than 4 passengers occupy the vehicle, more passenger pages can be added to the report. The final series of sheets are used in special circumstances. These include a non-motorist page that is to be used for pedestrians, bicyclists, or any other person traveling using a non-motorized method. This sheet collects personal information for non-motorists and is similar to the driver sheet. Appendix A is an additional space for a narrative. The new form contains a full page for narratives that need more room to document the details of the crash. Appendix B is for commercial vehicles. This sheet contains information for qualifying commercial vehicles in qualifying crashes. Appendix C is a sheet designed to efficiently collect information on bus passengers. This form should be used for all bus passengers instead of the back of the driver form displayed earlier. Appendix D is a bicycle form that is similar to the vehicle sheet to document specifics about the vehicle on which the non-motorist was traveling. Lastly, Appendix E was designed to collect information for witnesses to the crash. With a new form comes new terminology. There are a few key terms that may not be obvious, but that you should understand. First harmful event is the first injury or damage-producing event that best characterizes the crash type. For example, a collision with another motor vehicle in operation, or a collision with a tree, or a non-collision event such as a rollover. Next is sequence of events. The new form allows you to describe the crash from the point of view of each vehicle. For example, Vehicle A would have a collision with a motor vehicle in operation as its sequence of events. However, events for Vehicle B would be described as: first, a collision with an animal; second, ran off the roadway left; third, a collision with a tree; and fourth, collision with a parked motor vehicle. Up to 4 events in chronological order can be selected for each vehicle. As part of the sequence of events, an officer is asked to define which event was the most harmful. In the previous example, for Vehicle A, this would be collision with a motor vehicle. For Vehicle B, it would depend on which event did the most significant damage or injury. Therefore, if the deer strike totaled the car, and the collision with the tree and other car were only minor scratches, then the collision with the animal would be the most harmful event. Lastly, what is a traffic way? A traffic way is very similar to the more familiar term roadway, and they are often used interchangeably. However, a traffic way encompasses all the right-of-way from boundary to boundary, where a roadway may only pertain to the paved areas. If a crash is completely contained outside the public right-of-way, then the traffic way ownership is considered to be private. If any portion of the event of that crash occurs in the public right-of-way, then that traffic way ownership is considered to be public. If you have any questions about the new PR-1, please contact the Crash Data Analysis section of the Department of Transportation. The first page is the crash summary form. At the top of this form, you'll see boxes where the officer can enter in the number of motor vehicles and number of non-motorists involved in the crash. At the top right, there's a box where the officer enters in the case number for this crash. The crash date, time, severity, and location are very similar to the current PR-1. However, latitude and longitude are now required for each crash. The latitude and longitude should reference the location of the first harmful event. If a vehicle leaves the traffic way, the location at which the vehicle leaves the traffic way should be the position noted in the latitude and longitude. This field is critical to identifying safety issues within the transportation system. As shown in this example from Hartford, when GPS points are collected for crashes, engineers are able to generate maps displaying crash locations. From these maps, we are able to create heat maps or crash density maps. These heat maps can be used to identify roadway issues, such as locations with a higher number of run-off-the-road crashes, or in this example, to identify locations with high under-the-influence crashes. Based upon this information, engineers and law enforcement can target these areas with design changes or more enforcement to prevent crashes from occurring in the future. Crash factors and conditions is the next section. Trafficway ownership and trafficway class help describe exactly where the crash took place. If the crash took place in a parking lot, you would select a trafficway class parking lot. However, if at any point in time a vehicle was on the public roadway, trafficway ownership should be set to public road. Light conditions, weather conditions, and trafficway surface conditions are similar to the current PR-1. The next set of data elements deal with first harmful event, which is a new MMUCC data element. First harmful event is defined as the first injury or damage-producing event that characterizes the crash type. An officer is asked to identify the first harmful event, such as a non-collision, collision with a person, vehicle, or non-fixed object, or a collision with a fixed object. An officer is also asked to identify the location of the first harmful event. Using crash-specific location and type of intersection, an officer indicates whether or not the crash occurred at an intersection or a non-junction. School bus related is used if the crash involves a school bus. Manner of impact details exactly how two or more vehicles came into contact. Contributing circumstances, environmental and road, indicate what conditions or circumstances led up to the crash. Officers are asked to identify if the crash occurred in a work zone. If so, what was the location of the crash relative to the work zone, the type of work zone, if workers were present, and if law enforcement were present. The back of the new PR-1 crash summary page is nearly identical to the current PR-1, where at the top of the form, you enter your diagram, in the middle of the form, you enter your narrative, and at the bottom of the form, you enter the officer's first name and last name, badge number, and police agency code. The officer also indicates if the case is open or closed. At the bottom of the form is a checkbox that indicates whether or not this is a revision to a previously submitted report. And this completes the crash summary page. The vehicle information sheet is used to document information about each vehicle involved in the crash. At the top of the page, an officer will assign each vehicle an identification number and identify the number of occupants in the vehicle, including the driver. In the motor vehicle information section, the officer will document things such as the VIN number, make, model, color, year of the vehicle, as well as whether or not the driver evaded responsibility, the plate number of the vehicle, and the road on which that vehicle was traveling. On the new form, the officer is also asked to identify the total number of lanes in a roadway, and if there were bike lanes or sharrows present. The motor vehicle crash information section is where an officer details information about the crash relative to the vehicle. The first box is sequence of events. The officer may choose up to 4 events in chronological order to describe exactly what happened to this vehicle during the crash. For example, in the vehicle just shown, the first event would be a non-collision running off the road to the right. The second event would be a collision with a motor vehicle in motion. The third event would be a collision with a fixed object. The most harmful event would be the collision with the fixed object, since it did the most damage or most injury or persons involved. Motor vehicle action replaces the prefix and suffix. This is where an officer describes the actions taken by a vehicle just prior to the crash. Contributing circumstances motor vehicle, posted statutory speed limit, towed, towed to, and body type are all self-explanatory. Motor vehicle damage is where an officer indicates exactly where a motor vehicle came in contact with a fixed object or another vehicle. The officer also selects the areas on the car damaged using the clock diagram, where 12 is the front of the car, 6 is the rear of a car, 9 is the driver's side, and 3 is the passenger side. The officer is also asked to evaluate the extent of damage. The last column on the motor vehicle crash information sheet is where the officer indicates the motor vehicle type, the roadway or traffic way description, roadway grade, roadway alignment, traffic control device type, if there was one, and if that device was functional. At the bottom of the form is where an officer would note the insurance information for this vehicle. On the back of the vehicle page, the officer can note the vehicle ownership information. If the owner is the same as the driver, the officer can simply check the box and move on. The officer is also asked to indicate if this vehicle was a special function vehicle, if it was an emergency vehicle, or if it was being used as a bus. Lastly, the officer is asked to note property damaged in the collision. This does not include vehicles that are damaged. The officer should indicate the nature and extent of damage to the property and the owner of that property. This is the end of the vehicle section. You should be reminded that you need to complete one vehicle sheet for every vehicle involved in the crash. Next is the motor vehicle driver information sheet. At the top of the page, you'll see a motor vehicle ID. This indicates which vehicle they were driving. Under that is person ID. Each person involved in the crash should be assigned a unique person ID. The next section is used to collect personal information about the driver, such as name, address, gender, and date of birth. The license information section is used to identify the license number of the driver, the state which assigned the license, the jurisdiction, license class, whether or not it was a commercial license, and any endorsements the driver may have. Ejection, restraint system, and airbag are very similar to the current PR-1. However, you should note that there are new options within each one of these elements. For example, with the airbags, you now have the ability to identify which airbag within the vehicle deployed, or if it was a combination of multiple airbags within the vehicle. You should note that helmet use only applies to occupants or drivers of motorcycles. Seating position is a 2-digit code. The first digit indicates the row the person was sitting in. The second digit indicates which seat the person was sitting in. For drivers, this would be an 11, or first row, left seat. If you have a mail truck or a foreign vehicle with a right-hand drive, the driver would be in seat 13. The last column in the driver information section allows an officer to identify the driver's actions at the time of or just before the crash. The officer can also identify if the driver was distracted, either by something inside the vehicle or a distraction outside of the vehicle. Lastly, the officer can identify the condition of the driver at the time of the crash. If the driver was physically impaired, emotionally impaired, asleep, or under the influence of drugs and medication. The last sections of the driver information page allow an officer to indicate injury, enforcement actions, and then drug and alcohol information. For injury status, notice that the selections have changed from the current PR-1. K is a fatal injury, A is a suspected serious injury, B is a suspected minor injury, C is a possible injury, and O is no apparent injury. The reporting officer is asked to identify if and how the driver was transported to a medical facility. They're also asked, if possible, to identify the company, the EMS run number, and the intended receiving facility of the driver. If any enforcement actions were taken as part of this crash, the officer is asked to document what type of action and then the statutes that were violated. Lastly, drug and alcohol information are requested for each crash. the officer is asked to identify the test status and the type of test given. The back of the driver sheet contains motor vehicle passenger information. At the top of the form, you're asked to identify which motor vehicle these passengers were traveling in. Each passenger should be assigned a unique person ID. The information collected for each passenger is very similar to the driver, such as name, address, date of birth, gender, seating position, restraint system, helmet use, ejection status, airbag status, injury status, and if they were transported to a medical facility. The new PR-1 was designed with a series of appendices to allow data collection for rare crash events. We will briefly cover each appendix to the new PR-1. The first is the non-motorist page. You notice at the top left there's a bicycle ID. Bicycle ID is another word for the vehicle ID. We also have person ID, which is a unique value for each person involved in the crash. You're also asked to record the vehicle ID which struck the non-motorist. The rest of the non-motorist page is nearly identical to the driver page, where non-motorist information such as name, address, gender, date of birth are collected. You'll notice that as you go through the form, the choices for the non-motorist page have been tailored to non-motorist activities. The narrative continued page is simply extra space to continue the narrative if more room is needed to document the crash. Appendix B is used for commercial vehicles. The top of the sheet indicates what constitutes a qualifying commercial vehicle crash. Officers are asked to document carrier information. Power unit information is collected on the vehicle sheet. Information can be collected on trailer 1 or trailer 2 if it's a tandem trailer. Space has also been made available to collect cargo body type, carrier type, vehicle configuration, gross weight, and hazardous materials. Appendix C is used for buses. This form is used to document each occupant on the bus. Collect the name, gender, age, if you don't know the birth date, seating position, ejection status, injury status, and date of birth. Appendix D is the bicycle page. On this page, enter all the information relevant to the bicycle involved in the crash. The bicycle page is identical to the vehicle page, except for the data elements have been tailored to a bicycle. Last is Appendix E. Use this page to collect all the information for any witness to the crash. Officers are asked to collect name, address, and date of birth of all witnesses to the crash. Officers are also asked to identify the source of their statement type, and to verify the witness observation. This concludes your crash course on collecting new MUCC PR-1 data elements.